Hi, everybody. Welcome. Nice to see you. We got a really big response to this film, which doesn't surprise me at all. I'm glad to uh, know it. I will be curious to hear if any of you didn't care for this movie, because pretty much every week, no matter what film we show, there's always at least one or two people who don't have a favorable impression of the film, but I've never met anyone that I know of that I can think of or remember that didn't like this movie. Please keep your audio on mute unless you are asking a question. When you have a question or a question to ask or comment to make, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom. At that point, I will call people in the order they raise their hand. And at that point, you should unmute and please ask your question or comment, and then remute as I respond. And we'll keep going that way. In the chat function, please introduce yourself to the group. Certainly, if you are from outside the greater Philadelphia area, please let us know where you're from. We also have a little feature on our website now, where in the world. If you really want to let us know where you're from and send us a message about how you came across BMFI and what you think of our online programs, please go there and let us know. We'd love to hear from you that way. But barring that, let's get started with the discussion. I'm so glad to have so many of you here and to start off already with some questions. And first up is Alan. Alan, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. I thought that this has been one of my all-time favorites. As a former prosecutor, I had exceptional interest in this movie, and I thought that the screenplay was amazing, even from a lawyer's perspective. They just really got it right. The cinematography, I thought, was fabulous. The close-up of the old man, you could touch his nose and the eyes that bored into you. And as you looked around the table, each and every character actor who you've known for years from every single movie and show that they've been in, each one had their own character, and the character development of the screenplay I thought was great. Here you have a tiny room, and to keep the excitement going, little things like crumpling pieces of paper like Henry Fonda did, and Jack Warden throwing the piece of paper at the fan that hit the old man. And yet the acting, the Lee J. Cobb soliloquy, Ed Begley's, and when all the jurors got up and faced the other way, it was riveting. And yet at the end, after Henry Fonda won everybody over, and Lee J. Cobb is sitting there after crumbling, and Henry Fonda goes over to him and just touches him gently and brings him his jacket. What an ending. Oh my God.
Well, I'm really glad you you liked it so much, and it seems like you are you hit many of the high points that people tend to notice, and I'm glad they all made such an impression on you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'm glad it had the intended impact, and I think you're right. The point you made about little things providing interest and action in little moments, providing character development, like when Martin Balsam gets frustrated, juror number one gets frustrated, that people are sort of giving him a hard time about how he's running things. He kind of sort of turns his back on the table and looks away like he doesn't need that headache, sort of thing. Little moments like that do a very good job of characterizing people in a film that isn't about individuals as much, but gives them opportunities to come through, which of course is crucial, because those individuals, they bring their individuality, their elements to that process, which is part of the film's point, I think. Let's see, David, you had a question or comment.
Well, Alan gave one of my points, which I'd like to sort of go back to, and that's the scene where the jurors get up and face generally away from Lee J. Cobb. But in fact, the way I was looking at it, and Janice and I spoke as it was happening, 4 or 5, I'm not sure my count is right, of the jurors had their backs completely to him, and 2 or 3 had a sort of a side stance where they were giving him what I was describing, I'd like your comment, a cold shoulder almost per se. The development of almost all of the 12 being, I mean, not completely equal, but all being so nicely done. What a great job between the screenwriting and the directing. And when I realized, reading up ahead and then seeing the character, my grandfather was a watchmaker who came from Europe. My father probably would have been more like that character had he been on a jury like this. And just watching the interaction, thinking about the different places these people came from physically and socially, societally, and the development was just really a wonderful experience. Thank you for choosing it. I appreciated your comments ahead. They gave me a very slightly different way, a slightly better way of watching the movie.
Well, I'm glad, David. You mentioned Lee J. Cobb. It's actually Ed Begley who has the
yes, my apologies.
That's okay. Who has the racist rant that really basically turns off the other 11 men, and they show their disapproval in their various ways. I think that I can imagine they might have rehearsed that with all the men turning away, but that might have seemed perhaps a bit too contrived or a bit too sort of showy. So I think the relatively more subtle way they conveyed that without words, but with just, turning away from that man, and then he gets isolated at that separate table, I think was a very smart and, again, visual way in a film that has to look for every visual opportunity it can because of the nature of its setting and what occurs in it. Let's see. Janice, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I agree with everything that was said before. I found the movie wonderful. I've seen it before, and I felt that way then as well. It's very moving. I also feel it's very important, always has been in our society and still is, and even more so. I wish that it would be shown in school, mandatory as part of the curriculum. But one thing that I noticed, and I didn't notice when you were speaking, and I'm sure, and obviously it may have been on the film as well, was what year this was done. I have a feeling from watching it as approximately, but the story's 12 Angry Men. And I was wondering if at that time women were on juries at all.
It's 1957 is the year the film was made. And my understanding, because this question always comes up, first I should say it is shown in a lot of schools. I know a lot of students who have, when I used to teach college, I know a lot of students would tell me they'd seen this movie in high school. So it is shown in a lot of schools.
Good.
The other thing regarding your other comment, women, I shouldn't say obviously, but women didn't participate in juries until they got the right to vote. And we know that came early in the 20th century. But even after that time, their participation in juries wasn't as common. I think part of that was how do I say this? Well, I guess we'd say sort of institutional chauvinism is a way to say it. But part of it was that it used to be that women could be excused from juries much more easily, because the thought was, or the logic was, I should say, and I imagine this probably still would have been true in 1957, was that women were essential to taking care of the children, and the men were presumed to only be missing their jobs for however many days they were missing their jobs, but who would take care of the kids at home if the women served on a jury? Now, that obviously shouldn't have excluded women from juries, but and I don't think that meant a blanket exclusion, but it did mean that women were far more often excused. My understanding is by their own request, as well as, I think, unfortunately, the request of the exemptions from the court, or however that process worked. But in 1957, while there certainly could have and would have been women on other juries in that building at that time, this one is a jury of 12 men. And frankly, I think that it was a common enough occurrence for an all-male jury in 1957 that he probably took a little bit of license, because 12 Angry Men has a much better ring to it than 12 Angry People, I think. So I think that might be part of it too. Thanks for your comments and question, Janice. Let's see. Charles, you had a question or comment.
I do. This is how much I like this film. I go to sleep counting the 12 angry men around the table, and it works for me. It's phenomenal. They looked to choose a Robert Webber type, and they found him. They found Robert Webber. The discussion we're having about everyone turning their backs to Ed Begley, I really think that's kind of the weakest scene, but they probably had nothing better that came to mind. I do think that's kind of weak, especially since Lee J. Cobb, if I'm not mistaken, goes into the crowd as well and leaves Ed Begley alone. The other thing I learned about the film was that the opening scenes were shot from floor level or close to floor level. The medium shots were used at the
Charles, I don't want to cut you off, Charles. I'm sorry, but I think you have this a little reversed, and I covered this in the intro about the introduction to the introduction video that came out with our announcement of the film. So I think most people have heard about those elements of cinematography. So I didn't want to make you have to go through that all.
I'm sorry, Andrew.
That's okay. Did you have any other comments?
Just that the people jumping over the table really does put me to sleep.
Well, that puts a whole new spin on it. I thought you were just picturing them as they went around, going around, but picturing them jumping over like cows jumping over the moon or whatever. That's a whole different thing, and I understand how effective that is.
It's pretty cool that I can name everyone by name.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Charles. I do think your point about, a Robert Webber type, these are, so much of the success of this film comes from the casting. And with the exception of Fonda, obviously, and Lee J. Cobb, the bulk of these actors were New York stage or television actors. And even Lee J. Cobb was a New York actor, though he'd obviously been in On the Waterfront and a number of other movies before this one. So he would have been known as well, certainly not on the scale of Henry Fonda, but most of the others this was a big breakthrough for them. And they were cast as much for how they looked and how they carried themselves and what sort of, type of man they seemed to be, as they were for their acting ability, given the nature of the film. And I think it's one of the great successes of the movie. Ed, you have a question or comment?
Yes. Hi, Andrew. Thanks. And I really loved your piece on this, that I watched this morning. I wanted to comment because I have actually I had a personal connection to Reginald Rose, the writer, and I got to meet him when we were both living in Westport, Connecticut, which is where he was living until he died in, I think, 2002. And I met him in the 80s. I was, pretty young, but I was in his house, and I knew who he was, and he was shocked I did, because he said, young people generally don't know who I am. And I said, well, I was a film major, so I saw 12 Angry Men. So I got to talk to him about it a little bit. One of the things I asked him was about, and someone already mentioned it earlier, about that there were no women on the jury. And, again, I was talking to him in around 1980, I'm thinking 3 or 4. And he said, if we were doing it today, there would be women in the jury. And I said, how do you think that would change it? And he thought for a second, and he said, I don't think it would change it that much, but it would add a different, I'm trying to remember the word he used, but it was something like a different spirit to it. But that's not the right word. It was having members of that were of the jury that were women would just bring a totally different perspective to it. So he actually thought it might improve it, which I thought was kind of interesting for him to say after he'd already written it and it's been so acclaimed. And I asked him about the awards he did win. I asked him where they were, and because I didn't see them on his mantle, and he said they were with his kids in their houses. But I just thought I'd share. He was a very nice, polite gentleman and a delight to talk with. And I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Well, thanks very much, Ed. And thanks for sharing, that sort of account of what Rose had to say on the matter. I always sort of thought, before I looked into it further, that, the gender dynamic certainly would have been a whole other layer on top of the ones the film already covered. And I feel like it might have been sort of biting off more than the movie could chew to add that layer in there. But, I guess we have to take it from the author's mouth. I would also mention to people that the legal system was something that was of great interest to Rose, and obviously great interest to Lumet as well. Rose went on to create the television series The Defenders, which was a very progressive show in its time, starring E.G. Marshall, who played juror number 4. And Lumet, of course, made a number of films about the legal system, whether it was Q&A or The Verdict, or even to an extent Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon. So he was, it was of interest to him, and they were both Jewish Americans, the children of immigrants who sort of came of age during the Depression. And I think that they both had an interesting and profound sense of social justice and of the potential of the American system, while also having the clear glasses rather than rose-colored, that it didn't always live up to the potential. So that they were a good pair to come together to make this film. Let's see. Robert, did you have a question or comment?
Oh, yes. Hi. I noticed that this film was nominated for 3 Oscars, Director, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay. It was not nominated for cinematography or editing, and the same goes for the Golden Globes. So I'm just wondering about, but I thought, after hearing your wonderful introduction to us, I thought the cinematography really was critical to this. And it would have been pretty boring if we didn't have such a creative cinematography, it seems to me, because of those angles you talked about, and also the stage movement. I mean, we didn't have a stage, but there was movement. These people moved around, they got up, sat down, and then somebody had to decide, well, what am I going to photograph? What am I going to put the camera on? There's so much going on, and somebody has to decide who they're going to look at, through the lens, and then from what angle and for how long. And those are all decisions, I guess, maybe you could explain.
Okay.
For example, the stage movements, getting up, sitting down, going this way, is that all decided by the director? And then these other decisions about placement of the camera and angles and how long you're going to stick with somebody, and then is that done by the cinematographer? And why wasn't this nominated for Best Cinematography?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. First of all, just a slight correction. It was nominated for Oscars for picture, director, and its adapted screenplay. And Bridge on the River Kwai won all of those. I don't know what was nominated for the Golden Globes because I don't care, because the Golden Globes shouldn't matter, but that's another topic for another discussion. Regarding your question, I think, I obviously don't know. I haven't checked. My guess is in 1957, they still had 2 cinematography awards, one for black and white and one for color. So my first thought, the initial thought would be, well, it's not as spectacular visually as something like Bridge on the River Kwai. I think it probably would have been in its own category. I don't know if it's a function of, different categories, different branches nominate their own kind. So in order to win, so cinematographers would have had to nominate Boris Kaufman, and perhaps they thought it wasn't a very hard job of cinematography. Perhaps they thought that he didn't, he had won, I think won, at least been nominated for On the Waterfront 3 years earlier. Maybe they thought this paled in comparison to that and it wasn't worthy. I honestly don't know. The things you were asking about where the camera is and the angle and how long a shot lasts and the blocking, which is how people move, all of that to varying degrees is either determined or determined jointly with the director. The question of the specifics and of the execution comes down to the cinematographer. So for the works of the camera. So it's a high angle shot, it's a low angle shot. Well, how high and how low? The cinematographer would have some say about that. It's a close up, how close? The cinematographer would have some say on that. The character needs to move from here to here over the course of this line of dialogue. How quickly does he move? What does his body look like when he moves? So on and so forth. That would be up to the actor with consultation with the director. The duration of shots is something that the editor, strictly speaking, controls, but feature films, I don't think, are ever edited without the director consulting with the editor. So, I agree that it's a very skilled and inventive work of cinematography. I think the system they came up with for adjusting the angles and their lenses as appropriate was very thoughtful. But people who make movies, I guess, just didn't agree that it was as impressive as many of us seem to think it was. So unfortunately, that's the way it goes. Let's see, Barbara Hirsh, you have a question or comment?
Yes. Hello, Andrew and everyone.
Hi.
I really appreciated this movie as an indictment of the justice system. I would not want my life in the hands of these jurors, or for that matter, this judge. And a couple of observations. One was the anonymity of all of it. We don't have the name of the defendant, and the jurors didn't share their names with each other, except a little bit at the very, very end after the trial and the jury has concluded. And I think that anonymity allowed for the lack of empathy. There was no introductions, no sense among the group of a shared project, except when a couple of people worked together to open the windows that were swelled by the heat. And that brought people together in a way that I'm thinking, for example, when the jury foreman helped Henry Fonda open the window and they got to chatting. And I think it was shortly after that the foreman changed his vote. So I think that that was kind of interesting. And the last comment is that here was a group of 12 men who were charged with this heavy responsibility. And among the 12 of them, they could not figure out that the fan was tied to the switch on the wall. Probably, probably a woman would have.
I think you just identified, I was going to say, one difference that would have occurred if there had been at least one woman on the jury. Absolutely. To your other comments, I think anonymity is partly to blame for the nature of the interactions in the film. I think, in some ways, it's like an online comment section now, right? People can pick a fake name and they can be as rude or obnoxious as they want to be, unfortunately. And perhaps that anonymity allowed those people to have a lack of empathy, as you said, but also to sort of more, be more blunt and plain about their thoughts and their feelings, which wasn't good for civility and cooperation, but was good for the sort of points that the film was trying to make about human nature and human bias and things like that. The other thing I think is important to realize about anonymity in this film is that it is very much intentional, and it is intentional throughout the film. The point that Rose and Lumet want to make is that this isn't about a specific case. This isn't about a specific crime. This isn't even really about a specific city, even though it's obviously set in New York. From the opening of the film, we see the outside of the courthouse, then we go into the courthouse, then we go up to that, I guess it's the second floor, and then we start following different people to different courtrooms, right? And we change who we follow until we just sort of end up outside the courtroom where the trial we end up focusing on is taking place. And the point of this is to show us that this could be any trial, any set of jurors, in any city, any sort of case, that this is every system, and this is every trial. And we should give every trial the amount of attention that is ultimately given to this one. And that it doesn't matter who these men are specifically, because this is what every dozen people who is charged with this has to deal with. And each of us in the audience, anybody, have personal biases and blind spots and things like that we have to get past to do the very important civic duty of being on the jury. And in fact, there's a moment in the movie when the sort of tide is turned to a majority. I can't remember if there's 3 holdouts or 4 holdouts, where Henry Fonda is seated at the table and a bunch of the people who agree with him are sort of behind him. And he looks across the table at, the Ed Begley and the Lee J. Cobb and maybe E.G. Marshall, I guess, and says, okay, now it's, 8-4, whatever, 9-3, whatever it is. And why don't you explain to us why you think he's guilty? And if Fonda isn't exactly looking at the camera, he's looking very close to looking right into the camera. And that sort of direct address is extremely rare in Hollywood film at that time. And it's almost like he's sort of daring us, or forcing each of us as viewers to sort of confront our own prejudices and our own limitations. And I think the film's, use of anonymity is very effective and very intentional for its strategy of trying to demonstrate that this is as broad of an issue and as broad of a story and a moral as it can. Let's see, Kenneth, you had a question or comment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I just want to say, back when I was in 7th or 8th grade in the 60s, we actually read this story as a project in English class, and it made a strong impression on me from all the way back then, and that's why I was anxious to see this. And I think this really did it justice. I really enjoyed seeing it. I think I may have seen it years ago, the movie, but I didn't really remember it all that well. My memory when we read the book is that we read it in sequence, or the story, and in the beginning, in my mind, there was no doubt that the guy was guilty. And someone had just posted up the question, do we think he really was? And I remember as we read the book, as things open up, more and more we started to think, you know what, maybe he's not guilty. And I don't know if I got quite the same thing here. I could see why they questioned some of the evidence, but it still wasn't clear, was he really guilty or not? And I think they opened up, what they did in the movie was open up real questions of doubt that kind of got glossed over, apparently got glossed over in the trial. And whereas when I remember there seemed to be a little more hard evidence when I read the book. But I think that they opened up some doubt, and I was a little surprised they didn't all gather together at the end when they announced the verdict. Don't juries usually go back to court and are there when the judge announces the verdict?
Yeah, I mean, they
I
are.
would like to see a little conversation between them at the end. But I thought it was kind of neat that even now we don't know any of their names. We have to try to remember their numbers. And I like the different attitudes. I remember this more from the movie, that we had the Jack Warden who just wanted to get to the baseball game. Henry Fonda and Lee J. Cobb seemed to be the two that really cared about it. Some of the others were trying to just get whatever can get us out of here. Let's just do it. Anyway, that's why I thought it was very well done.
Well, I'm glad you did. I think we want to keep focus on what, first of all, we should think about the sort of limitations of a play and a teleplay, and that might have had something to do with why they didn't go back. But really, I think the real reason we don't see them going back into the courtroom is it would have been thoroughly anticlimactic because one, the process was the point, the jury process, and whether the individuals could rise above and do what they were being called upon to do was the point. Second, I think the boy's guilt or innocence is really is secondary as well. I think that's another part of the sort of, this broad theme of process and to an extent of anonymity that, and Fonda says this repeatedly throughout, right? He doesn't know if he did it. He could have, maybe not. And he has a moment of pause when Jack Warden says to him in the restroom, do you ever think that maybe you're going to be letting a murderer go free? And that gives him pause. But the fact remains that they have a charge and they have a standard to meet, and the case meets the standard or doesn't. And he firmly believed the case didn't meet the standard. Regarding anonymity, there's one more thing I wanted to mention, which is, of course, the young man accused of the crime as well, right? It's very interesting that we never hear any talk of any specific, ethnicity, religion, anything like that. Ed Begley Jr. sort of says, you know what those people are like. Not Junior, sorry. Ed Begley Jr. would not do that. Ed Begley says, you sort of don't know what those people are like, referring to whatever group the ethnic group or religious group or national origin group the defendant belongs to, but he never identifies it. And they cast a defendant who could perhaps be a person of many possible different backgrounds. So again, sort of broadening it out and trying to make it as applicable as widely as possible. Something the film does well, I think. Let's see. Adrienne, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. I wanted to say that I had really, this is all new to me, so I've been doing this for just a short time, but I thought this was an excellent film, and I wasn't sure when I was looking at the substance of it, looking at visually just a trailer, what I would think. And I thought that the character study and the development of the characters was really phenomenal. And what really at the end of it, when I sat down and started, I thought, well, this is going to be pretty boring because it's in one room. At the end of it, I said, wow, I was so riveted on the characters that the setting, a one scene setting, did not matter at all. And I think that was probably a very difficult way of developing the subject, knowing that they were all in one setting that they didn't move from. And I thought that was ingenious.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of people remember about the film, and that's one of the things that sort of makes the film relatively unique, but also makes it, you know, very challenging for the director and the cinematographer, challenging for the actors, and has the potential to make it challenging for us as viewers. But it seems like most of us found that to be an interesting element, the sort of the powder keg, the pressure cooker, the crucible sort of way that the role that the room served, I think was, you know, most of us would agree was a real net positive for the movie. Absolutely. Let's see. Lilyan, you had a question or comment? Okay, then let's go. Oh, okay.
I never could find that.
Oh, something's going on.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
I'm sorry, Lilyan, we can't hear or understand you. I wonder if you're on the phone and your computer or something. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe you can try to fix that sound.
My computer is
okay.
I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Dana, you had a question or comment.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Another great discussion. So I have another layer to lay here. This is to me a masterpiece, and it's amazing to me that it was Lumet's first film. So I was really curious to see how it, the metamorphosis. So I watched the original teleplay, the Studio One teleplay from 1954, because I was curious to see how it moved. It's only 3 years. The film was 3 years after the teleplay. And I can tell you that it was such an eye-opening and interesting process. A lot of it was captured, Andrew, when you gave your introduction. So I found three things that really wowed me about how it moved from the teleplay, which was quite good, to the film, which was, I think, amazingly good. First of all, the camera, which a lot of people have talked about, and just how the eye of the director changed, because the camera was pretty static in the teleplay, and just the moving of the camera, particularly at the end when it's looking up at Henry Fonda, and we've sort of he's now, of course, the man of the hour. So there was that movement. So the camera was huge. The other thing that I noticed that was different and terrific was there was a real New Yorkness about the film that the teleplay didn't have. Partly from the script, because when it was enlarged, it was only an hour. So when it was enlarged, the characters were better developed, and they became anonymous still, but more New Yorky types. And it made them sort of less anonymous to me, because they all represented a different sort of New York person. It was a very New York feeling in that room. And I couldn't get past that. And I kept thinking that outside of that window, particularly that rainy window, because when it was raining, it was all New York out there too. And the idea of this movie taking place in that teeming city where these people were all these New Yorkers were working together, sort of gave it a real universal everyman quality for me. The third thing is the heat. There's a line in the play that says it's the hottest day of the year. It was both in the teleplay and the film, and it was very hot in the teleplay, but in the film, I thought it was excruciating. I felt like I was in a claustrophobic oven with 12 pieces of white meat getting roasted and cooked and baked and crisped until they got burnt, and then they were going to get spit out. And I think the addition of that horrible heat in that room, which we all felt, I mean, throughout, it was a great prop thing that they kept using, just upped the ante to the movie. So there are many other things, but those three things really stood out, and it was just marvelous to see how a play, which I think looks like and feels like a play, and maybe belonged as a play, turned into just a breathtaking movie that emerged from this. So anybody who's interested, it's easy enough to get online. It is so interesting to watch the 1954 teleplay. And you get Westinghouse commercials from 1954. How can you beat that? So again, thanks for the great introduction, and just a masterpiece of a film.
Well, thanks for sharing that that perspective, Dana. And that's something I have to confess I've never done. I've never gone back and watched the teleplay. I've seen other productions from that era, but never this one. But I think you make a really interesting point, which is we've all heard the term when something that is a play, typically we mean a stage play, but sometimes a teleplay is going to be brought to the movies. They talk about opening it up. And so often that means, adding scenes and setting scenes in different places that you can show more easily in a film than you can on the stage, and so on and so forth. But people don't often think about what you mentioned, the sort of adding the elements of characterization and drawing a richer sort of sense of the world outside of the jury room. And I have to say also, though for that hour of live television, basically what happens to those actors has to happen to those actors, where here in the film, you can have the appearance anyway of the heat build and show the effects of it on their person, on their clothes and on their faces, and sort of have the time and the continuity to sort of have that build over time in a way that probably would have been very difficult to do in live television. So I think you've pointed out some interesting ways the movie has sort of opened itself up, so to speak. Let's see, Joss, you had a question or comment.
Oh God, you could go on forever about this incredible film. There was not a misstep from the writing to the directing to the cinematography to the characters and the performances. It's just fabulous. There was some discussion in the chat about Henry Fonda's role. And I had some thoughts about that. Everybody else had a character quirk or feature that was, highlighted that character. Ed Begley was a racist, and Lee J. Cobb was just an angry, disgruntled man, and so on. Henry Fonda didn't have a particularly distinctive character feature. And I wonder if it wasn't his role to be our surrogate to some extent, kind of the hero we would want to be in that situation. So I want to open that up for discussion. Just a couple of other points. Great discussion in your introduction, Andrew. Loved what you had to say about use of lenses and cameras and camera angles. There was one other element of the cinematography that struck me, and that was light and dark. There were periods where the room went dark when the thunderstorm went by, and it wasn't just that there was a thunderstorm going by. It seemed to me there was dramatic purpose. There were shots where the faces were highlighted, the backgrounds were dark, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts about those things. Great movie. Thanks for choosing it.
Sure. No, I think you're right. I think another thing this film does well and that the cinematography deserves credit for is giving us that subtle sense of the passage of time, both in when the weather changes, as you say, and then how the room's getting darker sort of until the moment they turn the lights on. Yeah, I also think there are certainly some moments, some shots, such as when we're seeing sort of visual reactions to an outburst by one character or another, that are really sort of almost more kind of a tableau and meant to be less sort of a shot within the action. And there you have some sort of interesting contrast between the lighting in the foreground and the color of the background, or the brightness or dimness, I guess, of the background. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That's something else the cinematography does, is help us with that passage of time to one degree or another, certainly. Christy, you had a question or comment.
Actually, Al.
Oh,
I saw this
hi,
movie. I saw this movie years ago, and I remembered it to be extraordinarily intense. So when I watched it this time, I was very interested in seeing if it held up and how it might have changed with the new prism of our new age. And what I think is extraordinary is this film showed how the system could work. The commonality of 12 white men gave a base for them to disagree, but still discuss. And it really struck me that we've lost that. Now people just can't find that common ground to discuss. And it said so much about our legal system, our social strata system, all these things. But you boil it down, what made the movie work was there was, at least, I want to say the word respect, there was some commonality that allowed them to disagree. And I just thought that was marvelous. And I think I wanted to ask you, this has come up before, but if you change some of the characters, either by religion or any of the other categories, could you get that commonality today?
Well, today you couldn't get that commonality with 12 white straight men of the same religion. I mean, today you wouldn't have, it's one of the, you know, forget a jury trying to exercise its very serious responsibility with stakes being very high. You know, people don't talk to each other. People don't talk to people they disagree with. People don't listen to people they disagree with or read things that they might disagree with. And the notion of disagreement has been turned into something, you know, that is far more sinister and objectionable and offensive than mere difference of opinion or difference of perspective. So, I mean, unfortunately, forget a jury room. I don't think, you know, you have these, I don't think, you know, it's very hard for people to have these conversations in general, in the jury room, in the coffee shop, in the, you know, around the neighborhood, and even in places where they definitely should be, like the college classroom. So I think it speaks, unfortunately, I don't want to say to something that's gone forever, but something that is not currently alive in society, which is our society, the willingness and the ability to engage with people you disagree with, sometimes vehemently. That's, to me, that's the biggest thing that's changed from the time of this film. Jennifer, you have a question or comment?
Hey, my 12-year-old daughter and I watched the film together this weekend, and I had read it as a high school student many years ago, and we played the parts. We were struck by the timing of the film, watching it this week after John Lewis's funeral, and in particular the scene where the Fonda character just sort of stands there with this switchblade aimed at his chest in front of the angry juror number 3, kind of willing to sacrifice his life for the principle in that one moment. And I thought it was resonant today. Did you want to say anything, Clara?
Well, yeah, I also wanted to, nobody really talked, well, there were a few points made about the weather changing, but I thought it was actually a really important part of the plot, because the rain, first of all, they turned on the lights when it rained to turn on the fan, which made everybody a lot less hot, and it also canceled, I don't know, juror number 6 or 7, the one with the hat.
Right, the ball game.
Yeah, the guy with the ball game. His ball game was canceled. So now he actually wasn't just stressing all the time about being hot and wanting to go to his ball game, getting out of that room. And yeah, and he changed his mind. And I instantly knew when
it started raining,
yeah. I was like...
You said the baseball game's going to change his mind. Yeah.
Right. I think that's very a very keen observation, that you know, obviously the film comes to a head at the end Lee J. Cobb's breakdown, but the film has these sort of mini, conflagrations throughout. And because of that, because of the building, it needs a sort of release valve. And that rain coming is a release valve because it changes the weather. It gives them all a distraction of something else besides what they've all been sort of arguing about. And it also, leads to the changing of the temperature, the changing of that juror's view of the whole process, which opens the door to other things. So yeah, that's a key moment. And I think it's symbolized by, as you said, by that storm. Let's see. Harry, you have a question or comment?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be a part of this. I've been watching this movie. I did not see it this week, I will admit, but I've been watching it, I think, for about 50 years, every chance I get, every time it's on TV. And to me, this movie was perfect. I don't think there was a moment in this movie that didn't matter. There was nothing in this movie that was a throwaway. Every motion, every gesture, every facial expression, every word carried weight. And I don't think from start to finish, from the first scene to the last scene, as they walk down the courthouse steps and Joseph Sweeney introduces himself to Henry Fonda, there wasn't a moment in this movie that didn't grab you. It was perfectly constructed. And I've been in the chat, excuse me, in the chat, a lot of people I noticed tonight have been almost comparing Henry Fonda to an angel. That was his role, even to the point of wearing white. And one thing that I remember about the movie, and I can't remember the exact verbiage, but there was one scene where Joseph Sweeney, the old man, is talking, and I think Ed Begley is standing there. And I don't think he says, "Shut up," but he says something to that effect. He says, "Oh, be quiet. Nobody's listening to you." And Sweeney is totally frustrated and says, "I'm talking." And Henry Fonda puts his arm around Sweeney and says, "He can't hear you. He never will." And I thought that was the only real moment where Henry Fonda was maybe a little bit less than an angel. He was kind of throwing a person away. Ed Begley can't be saved. Ed Begley is beyond redemption. This is who he is. Forget it. Don't even bother. And that was, to me, like a little bit of a misstep, but at least it showed that Henry Fonda in his role was not necessarily an angel. He was human. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, I did not see the original TV production. I know Bob Cummings was in it. He may have played the Henry Fonda role, I'm not sure. And Franchot Tone, if anybody remembers that name, he was in it. But Showtime later, many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, did a remake of 12 Angry Men with an all-star cast. Jack Lemmon was in it. George C. Scott was in it. But it couldn't hold a candle to this original production. And I think maybe one of the reasons why is not just because of this remarkable cast. Whoever the casting director was for this movie has to be the best casting director who ever lived, because everybody in this movie played their role to perfection and was the perfect choice. Can you imagine any other actors in any other part? I can't. And I think maybe even it worked to some actors' disadvantage, because somebody like Jack Warden kind of played that role for the rest of his career. The wisecracking, fedora-wearing, sports-loving, gum-chewing, cigar-smoking guy. That was he didn't have many other roles besides that, and he was a tremendous actor. So as great as somebody like he was in this movie, I think he may have found himself the victim of type.
Harry?
Yes.
I appreciate the comments, but we some other folks have comments they'd like to make as well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on the film. I think that you're absolutely right about the casting. I think part of the credit needs to be given to the director, though, the director who guides the actors through their performances. And no one knew it at the time, of course, but Lumet would go on to a decades-long career, and he would guide a number of actors to Oscar nominations and other awards. So I think part of the credit goes to Lumet, certainly. Regarding the notion of Fonda as an angel, I think that there are some other times when he's a little less than angelic. I think he has the doubt that that he might be letting an innocent, a guilty man, or helping a guilty man be exonerated. And I think that troubles him. I also think there are times when he's a little bit, he's a little smug, a little bit. And I don't think angels succumb to that inclination, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Joel and Carole, you had a question or comment.
Yeah, hi, this is Joel. And the previous commenter just touched a little bit on it. For such a simple plot and a simplistic setting, this was obviously a fabulous movie that has touched on many of us for a lot of years. And I'm wondering how much of the success of this movie and how we all felt about the movie was a result of the fabulous cast. Almost, I think with one exception, almost all of the cast became successful. How much of the success of the movie was because of the cast, or did the cast become successful in their later careers because of such a great movie to begin with?
Well, I don't think that's a question we can ever answer. It's sort of a chicken and egg question in a way. And I don't think it's one we'll ever be able to answer for certain. I can tell you that the vast majority of these people were not well known, certainly not to the were not known at all, certainly not to the movie-going audience. So were they always this, inherently talented and destined for success, and Lumet and the other people involved in the film noticed that and hired them? Or was it some guidance they got? I mean, as I said in my introduction, part of the reason Henry Fonda hires Sidney Lumet to direct this, and Fonda was a producer on this film along with Rose, was because he observed him teaching an acting class. So he knew that he would be able to work well with the actors.
Or did their standout performances result in future opportunities and careers for them?
Yeah, we'll never know. We'll never. Certainly, their success in this film had a lasting impact on their careers. The question is, did the film benefit them, or did they benefit the film? And that's something we'll never know, unfortunately. Let's see, Steve, you had a question or comment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Just two observations. One, I've seen this on stage with Richard Thomas. I loved it. I've seen the 1997 remake, and I think the speaker who spoke earlier about the 97 remake is right on. The problem is, anytime you watch this movie or play being done by anyone else, you immediately flash back to, okay, oh, that's Henry Fonda, and that is E.G. Marshall. For me, the interesting part for the 97 remake is the Lee J. Cobb character, no, the Ed Begley character is a black man who was Bubba in the Forrest Gump movie. And the same lines, but to hear a different person saying those lines, for me, changes my impression of what he was talking about in his own racism. It's also a very diverse movie. The only thing I want to say is that for me, this movie is about people either holding up a mirror or finding their voice. John Sweeney, there was said earlier about, oh, he'll never listen to you. Jack Klugman, who struggles to speak and doesn't speak for a good portion of the first part of the film, and finally finds his voice later on. And then the mirrors, of course, Ed Begley and Lee J. Cobb, that room and those interactions become a mirror to the inner torment that they have. That's all I had to add. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about the film, and I think, going back to that notion of anonymity, someone brought up earlier, is that people probably felt a little more license to quote unquote be themselves, or to let their thoughts, no matter how sort of blunt or even dark, come out. And that's where you get some great drama sometimes. Yeah. Kenneth, you had a question or comment.
I was just going to say, two of my favorite scenes from the movie were the one where Henry Fonda was trying to make a point, and he noticed the people in front were playing a game with pencil and paper, and you could see the rage in his voice that we got a man's life at stake here, and you can't even pay attention to what people are saying, and the way he ripped that paper out from them. And the other thing, which was, I guess, pretty obvious, but I don't remember this from before, is the way Lee J. Cobb broke down at the end. And you realize that wasn't that he was prejudicial. It's just that he had such a poor relationship with his own son that influenced, it's almost like he was taking this out on the suspect. It's as if his own son treated him badly, and he didn't want the suspect to get away with possibly treating his father that way. And considering there wasn't a lot of that type of gripping scene, I thought those two were both done very well. And as a quick aside, if anybody was interested, on the Decades TV network, they happen to be showing all weekend episodes of the old Odd Couple TV show. So I felt like I saw more of Jack Klugman this weekend than I've seen in years.
Well, I'm sure somewhere right now there's a Quincy marathon going on as well. So maybe people could hit the trifecta.
That'll be next time.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Kenneth. Let's see. Robert, did you have another question or comment?
Oh, thank you. I wanted to just make an observation, being a lawyer. Something that just struck me was the Fonda character was a juror, and he took it on himself to go walking one night. He went to a store and he bought a switchblade and brought it back to the jury room. That would have been, if the judge had found out, it would have been grounds for a mistrial, because the jury is bound to consider only evidence that was presented at trial and admitted into evidence by the judge. So his going out and doing that violated every rule that we have in trial that govern juries, that jurors are not allowed to go out and develop their own evidence out of sight of the judge or the other two lawyers. So that would have just destroyed the trial if anybody found out. Then the other thing is, what you did not see in the beginning was the instructions to the jury made by the judge. You only heard one instruction, which was the one about reasonable doubt. But in a real trial like this, the judge would have given several instructions to the jury, one of which would have been how to evaluate eyewitness testimony. And in this case, the eyewitness testimony was extremely weak, in that you had somebody seeing something, I believe, through the windows of a train at the same time, with a lot of noise, and also hearing things. The old guy heard things. And in my professional opinion, I think that evidence might have been so weak that the judge might not have even permitted it to be admitted and heard by the jury. But anyway, the judge would have instructed the jury on eyewitness evidence as well. But I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you, Robert, for that that professional perspective. I will say I got an email about this film that talked about sort of, how it seems to have a very pessimistic view of the justice system in general, given how many of the jurors seem to not take their task seriously, and given how that judge seems like he wants to be almost anywhere else except in that courtroom. I don't know if I would agree with it as pessimistic. I would certainly think of it as cynical, though. And it's interesting because one review I read said the judge had that sort of affect because he took it as a foregone conclusion that the young man was guilty, whereas I perceived his affect as just disinterest and boredom with something that to him is sort of mundane and he's seen a million times, but that obviously should never be treated that way, which is part of the point of the film. In any case, I'm glad so many of you enjoyed the film. I'm glad so many of you joined us for this discussion. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Please sign up for our emails if you don't already receive them. Every Thursday, you'll get notice of a new movie we have coming down the pike. Tomorrow night, we have a wonderful seminar with our wonderful instructor, Jennifer Flieger, about sound, the emergence of sound in Hollywood. There are some spots left in it. You can register on our website, go to the Film Studies Online section of brynmarfilm.org. You can see we've got some other seminars coming up on a number of topics, and we'll have more after this as well. So please check those out. They're a really great opportunity for a sort of deeper dive into their respective topics. In addition, as I said, sign up for our emails. Every Thursday, you'll get an email with a link to the video introduction for the film that is to be discussed the following Monday. And you will also learn what that film is and even how you might be able to find it to stream. And finally, we have a lot going on in film education and beyond. Please visit the Theater 5 section of brynmarfilm.org. Please visit the Film Studies Online section of brynmarfilm.org. And if you like what we're doing, please consider making a donation. Until we can all be back in our theater at 824 West Lancaster in Bryn Mawr, or back in our classroom there, it's great to see you all every week during these discussions, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.